And we are live. All right. So my name is Chris Berry, certified law attorney, certified financial planner with Castle Wealth Group. And we like to do these weekly wisdom webinars every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. They are recorded. So if you ever miss one, they're available on YouTube. And you can just ask for the link, but it's just type in Castle Wealth Group on YouTube and we should pop up. And we're going to start with positive focus, just something positive that happened over the last week or so. And a lot of times it is family related because what we do at Castle Wealth Group, we help good families plan, protect, and preserve what's important. My positive focus is my son, who is wrapping up 7th grade. He just had his last concert. He plays clarinet, and his group sounded really great. And they played a cover of Enter Sandman by Metallica, which was kind of fun, which is like a heavy metal kind of rock song. Repurposed for orchestra or bands. So that was kind of cool. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And if you do have any questions, feel free to put it into the Q&A. But I did have a couple things sent over, and let me share my screen. All right. So the first question is, how does a castle trust protect the assets from lawsuits? So how does the castle trust protect the assets from lawsuits? So we have different types of trusts. We have revocable trusts that avoid probate, and then we have asset protection trusts. We call it a castle trust. In fact, today, we're not at the main office. I'm at one of my satellite offices in Livonia, but I was just giving a presentation to about 20 CPAs. And we're spending a lot of time talking about the different types of trust as continuing education for CPAs. And a lot of them were surprised to just understand that there are different types of trust other than just your basic revocable trust. So we also have asset protection trust, like a castle trust. And where these came from, and this is what I shared with them, is that in the past, you had revocable trusts, and then you had irrevocable or more complicated trusts. In the past, we were really concerned about like estate taxes, where we would set up these kind of more complicated types of trusts to protect against estate taxes, where if you had more than $600,000 of assets and you passed away, the government could now swipe in and take a portion of those assets because the estate tax exemption was only at $600,000. Well, now it's at $24 million. And so and it was growing over that time. So it was at 600,000, and then $1 million, and $1.5 million, and $3.5 million, and $5 million, and then $10 million, and now it's at $24 million. So if you have less than $24 million, you don't have to worry about estate taxes. And a lot of people initially looked at trusts just as a way to avoid estate taxes. But in reality, trusts can do more than that. They can avoid probate, which a basic revocable trust does. But then there's more complicated trusts, like a castle trust. And so the castle trust, the big benefit that I think a lot of my clients, or why it appeals to them, is that it protects against long-term care costs. It builds in asset protection to protect against long-term care costs, where if we have the assets sitting in the trust for a period of 5 years, because Medicaid has this look-back period, then everything inside of the trust is protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend down, because Medicaid looks back 5 years. So you can have Medicaid pay this base level of care, and then you have a pot of resources available to pay for additional services. So that's a big benefit of the castle trust, but it also is an asset protection trust, meaning if, let's say, you were get in a car accident, of course you have insurance and you might have an umbrella policy, but they could come after you personally. But what the castle trust also does is that it shields your assets. So for purposes of nursing home creditors, for the purpose of debts, of creditors, of lawsuits, the castle trust is a separate entity. Where it's not a separate entity is for tax purposes. So you pay taxes the way you normally do. So this isn't a more complicated trust to avoid estate taxes, because then we would have to give up control. You'd have to have a separate tax ID number, that type of thing. But it still is a separate entity as it relates to your assets with regards to asset protection from lawsuits. So a lot of business owners, this appeals to them. I have clients that have real estate and they put their assets into the castle trust because they're concerned about like creditors and lawsuits, because the world's a lot more litigious. I was driving in the highway to get to the continuing education with CPAs today, and I saw probably 5 personal injury billboards with other attorneys. So the world's a lot more litigious, and that's where the castle trust can build in, or does build in, another level of asset protection, because the assets aren't in Jim and Jane's name, where now we can sue Jim and Jane. They're in the Jim and Jane trust, which for creditor protection, it's a separate entity. Now, if you don't manage it correctly, there always could be some bad fact cases, but we've had the Castle Trust protect against divorces before. So it's tested. And again, this isn't something that I just came up with. This type of planning has been around since the 90s. And it's difference between estate planning. Estate planning is what happens if you pass away versus elder law, which is what happens if you don't pass away and you continue to age and face all the issues that go along with aging, and protecting you from the threats. And one of those threats is long-term care costs. And another threat is how litigious society is. So, yeah. So yes, a Castle Trust does protect your assets if there was a lawsuit. All right. So that was one question. Let me pull up another one that we have. So let me click some buttons here. All right. A lot of legal questions today. And let me share my screen again. Give me just half a second. And again, I do these kind of on the fly, so it's not like there's any PowerPoints. And sometimes when I'm scribbling, my handwriting isn't looking good, but I'm not at my main office, so no scribbling today. All right. So the second question here, let me share my screen. All right. Divorce to separate assets for long-term care not being a good idea. So, and here's another question coming in. Okay. Yeah. So I'll address that question. All right. So divorce to separate assets. So, and this was actually ironically brought up this morning in the continued education class with CPAs as well. So it's kind of ironic. I had someone raise my hand as we're talking about dealing with long-term care, and we're talking about setting up an asset protection trust like the Castle Trust. Someone in the back raised their hand and said, well, I've heard some of my clients that they talk about like getting a divorce if you're in a long-term care situation. Yeah, so if you are a married couple and one spouse needs nursing home care and the other spouse is healthy, you can go through the court process of getting a divorce where the judge will then separate the assets, because again, Medicaid has this 5-year look back period. But in my 18 years of practicing elder law, I think maybe we recommended that once, and it was just an odd situation where they weren't really together in the first place. It was, there was other factors going into it, but from an asset protection standpoint, I don't advocate for divorce. There's typically other strategies that we have. So one of those is setting up the asset protection trust, setting up the Castle Trust. And a question someone asked, is there a downside to setting up the asset protection trust? It's a little more complicated, a little bit more to administer in terms of there are some extra steps of getting assets out of the trust and more of an investment to set up. So those are really the downsides of the Castle Trust versus a revocable living trust. But really the Castle Trust is just basically a revocable trust on steroids. Not that steroids are a good thing, but a stronger revocable trust that builds in asset protection. But getting back to the question, with regards to divorce, so we have other strategies, we have other tools. Like, can that be a tool? Yeah, but I would always look to the other tools first. So the first thing is, if we're planning ahead, we set up an asset protection trust, we make it the 5 years, and then we're golden. But let's say we're in a crisis situation where you have a loved one in a nursing home now. There's certain things that we can do as elder law attorneys to protect those assets. So we can typically protect at least half of those assets. So if you had a loved one in a nursing home right now with, let's say, $300,000, normally they would have to spend down to $2,000 worth of countable assets. But there's strategies we have in crisis, we call it a Medicaid crisis plan, where we can protect roughly half of the assets. So half the assets probably would have to go to the nursing home, the other half we could protect. And with married couples, we have more strategies available. It's pretty complicated, and it's a lot, but there are things where if we have a married couple with one spouse in the nursing home, typically we can move the assets over to the healthy spouse. But this is an area where the government's always kind of moving the cheese, so to speak, where they're changing the rules. They haven't really changed the rules much with regards to planning ahead, setting up the asset protection trust. They had a 3-year look back period in 2006 that was changed to 5 years, but they grandfathered in any prior planning. So typically the government isn't looking harshly at people who plan ahead. They're more focusing or going after people who don't. So that's where the crisis planning side of things, that's where things are always changing around. The government's always changing the rules. Almost weekly, we get alerts of proposed Medicaid and law changes with regards to crisis planning. So that area is always changing. But again, getting back to the original question, divorce could be an option. I would go through the other options first before we go that route, because also that could screw the other person up in terms of their Social Security potentially and VA benefits as well. So it is an option, but it's probably not the best option or best tool. And that's really what we look at is we first figure out what are your goals, figure out the best strategies, and then pick the right tool. So divorce in a situation where one spouse is needing nursing home care is, I guess, a tool, but if our goal is to protect assets, there might be better tools out there. So hopefully that helps. All right. And this is the last question that I had submitted ahead of time. So let me bring it up. All right. Capital gains on brokerage accounts to protect assets versus keeping in the Roth to protect from capital gains. All right. So what this question was getting at is having an IRA exit strategy. So IRA exit strategy, most people understand that they want to get money out of those pre-tax accounts in an intelligent manner, just because taxes are going up. And so most people are familiar with a Roth conversion, where we take the money out of the pre-tax IRA, we pay the tax, and now it's inside of the Roth. So what is the advantage of the Roth? The advantage of the Roth is that you've paid the tax. So it's post-tax, plus it grows tax-free. But the downside of the Roth is that it cannot go into an asset protection trust because it's still a qualified account. We can pull the money out of the Roth, but then it's going to go in a brokerage account. And people sometimes get hung up on, oh no, it's going to be like taxed horribly. But understand that if it's inside of a trust, you're only going to potentially pay tax on the capital gains, and you're not going to have capital gains unless you sell. So if we have $100,000 of, let's say, Microsoft stock inside of the trust, and it goes up to $200,000, there's still no tax. Okay. So it grows essentially tax-free, just like a Roth. And then when you pass away, as long as you have less than $24 million, it goes to the kids or the beneficiaries tax-free as well, because you get a step up in basis. So when we're choosing our IRA exit strategy of, okay, I know I don't want to leave money in my pre-tax accounts because they're not protected, and we know taxes are going up, they're scheduled to go up, plus we're almost $32 trillion in debt. We know we want to get money out of the IRAs in an intelligent manner. And that's where typically we're looking at your tax bracket, seeing how much space we have in the tax bracket. And then the second piece is, okay, how much to move? Okay. The second piece is, where do we move it? And so it's, again, pros and cons. We can do a Roth conversion. Okay, grows tax-free. I can cash it out tax-free, goes to the kids tax-free or beneficiaries tax-free. The downside is it's not asset protected. So if you're to go in a nursing home, they're going to come after your Roth. Versus we can put it into the asset protection trust, where the advantage is it's asset protected. It grows as long as it's invested correctly. It basically grows tax-free. Okay. And this is where it gets a little complicated. If you have a lot of buying and selling inside of mutual funds, and this is where Vanguard got sued, I think, but they got obliterated because recently a lot of these Vanguard funds, they would sell like within the year, and it would cause these phantom capital gains where you didn't actually see any like income from it, but because they sold off a position inside of one of their funds, you had a tax that you had to pay. So that's why whatever we invest in the trust has to be invested tax efficiently. Like the way that you invest inside of an IRA or 401k, you don't have to worry about like capital gains or selling within the year. So you can change those accounts, and those can be more actively managed. But money inside of the trust, we want more of a buy and hold strategy. And then also there's some tools that grow completely tax-free, like IUL, which is a great tool inside of the trust. So yeah, you do have to invest a little bit differently, but as long as you're intelligent with how you're investing inside of the trust, it basically has all the benefits of a Roth, where it can grow tax-free, tax efficiently, and you can leave it to the next generation tax-free, just like a Roth, but now you've built in the asset protection. And again, I'm not saying if you have an asset protection trust, you should like liquidate everything and throw it in the trust. We have to look at those different accounts. And that's why we bring this legal, financial, and tax all together, so that if we have a legal structure, the financial and the tax piece has to fit into that correct legal structure. So all these pieces fit together. That's really one of the advantages of working with us is that as a certified law attorney, as a certified financial planner, we're looking at the whole picture. So we're looking at the tax piece, we're looking at the investment piece, and we're looking at the legal piece as well. So with that, let me see if we have any more questions coming in. We have a good number of people on here, some familiar faces. All right, it looks like that is all we have. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. Make it a great week.